water does not move, but something underneath has changed. The sky pressed flat against the sea, and the air forgot its name. We row through glass that should not shine. The calm is not a gift. The water holds its breath before the sky falls down. Vatnið heldur andardrætti áður himinn fellur niður. The birds have left the coast behind. No gull follows our wake. The rope hangs loose without the wind. Even salt has lost its weight. The sea is flat like something dead. The calm is not a gift. The water holds its breath before the sky falls down. Vatnið heldur andardrætti áður himinn fellur niður. I held my hand above the rail and watched the surface not respond. No ripple where my shadow fell, as though the sea had swallowed sound. The helmsman looked at me and turned. His mouth began to shape a word, but the air took it before I heard, and the water held what he could not. Its breath before the sky falls down. Vatnið heldur andardrætti áður himinn fellur niður. Like a burial cloth, no wind to push us home or gone. The rope swings once and then it stops. The mast stands like a warning bone. Something left before we could. Even the wind knows when to leave. No wind to warn the living, no sound before the wave. Engi vindar varar lífandi, eigi ljóð fyrr en bylgja. The ore breaks nothing when it dips. The sea accepts it like a mouth. The wood returns without a mark, as though we never pushed it down. We move, but nothing here has changed. Even the wind knows when to leave. No wind to warn the living, no sound before the wave. Engi vindar varar lífandi, eigi ljóð fyrr en bylgja. She stood at the bow and closed her eyes and said she could smell the change. Not rain, not salt, not iron, but the scent of something being erased. The way a fire smells the moment after the last coal breaks apart. Not smoke, but the memory of smoke. That is what the wind left behind. Last night, a sound below the waterline. Not cracking, just a low complaint. The wood remembers what we forget. The grain still holds the forest wind. Wood does not lie. The hull knows what we deny. The wood bends before men break. Sjórinn veit, það við neitum. Viðurinn beygist áður menn brotna. I pressed my ear against the plank and heard the pressure underneath. The sea was leaning on the ship, the way a hand leans on a throat, not squeezing yet but letting know. Wood does not lie. The hull knows what we deny. The wood bends before men break. Kjöllrin veit, það vér neitum. Viðrin beygist áður menn brotna.
The shipwright told me once that oak remembers every storm, not in its rings, but in the way it bends an inch before it should. He said the day the wood stops bending is not the day the storm arrives. It is the day the wood decides that breaking is the honest thing.
What we deny. The wood bends before men break. Kjöllrin veit, það vér neitum. Viðrin beygist áður menn brotna. The oar came up too fast. Something pushed it from below. No one said it, but we saw. The blade was warm when it should be cold. The sea is swallowing from underneath. We do not name what moves below.
Something moves where light dies.
We feel it through the oar. Nokkuð rörist þar ljóstegir.
Við finnum það
Gegnum arna. The water changed its weight at noon. Thicker now like something bled. The current pulled against our line, not wind, not tide, but something fed. Beneath us, breathing with the hull. We do not name what moves below.
something moves.
gegnum árna. Rower stopped mid-stroke and pointed at the shadow underneath. Longer than our ship by half and darker than the deepest trench. The others pulled him back to row and told him it was just the keel. But every man who looked that day counted his own children twice.
Something moves where light dies.
We feel it through the ore.
Nökkudrör í þar ljósstein.
Við finnum það
Gegnum árna. We feel it through the ore.
Nökkudrör í þar ljósstein.
Við finnum það
Gegnum árna.
Between the sea and sky, dissolve like blood inside the water. No edge, no border, nothing held. The grey swallowed both directions, and we became the only solid thing. Where do you go when the edge is gone? The horizon swallowed whole, and nothing left to steer by. Sjóndel darringur gleiptur heil, ekki eftir að stýra. I held the bearing south by star, but every star has drowned tonight. The compass of my father's hand points nowhere in this grayless light. We steer by what we used to know. Where do you go when the edge is gone. The horizon swallow whole, and nothing left to steer by. Sjóndel der ringer gleiptar heil, ekki eftir at stýra.
The helmsman sat and closed his eyes and steered the way his grandfather did. Not by the stars or by the waves, but by the feeling in his knees. He said the sea has a direction, even when the world goes flat. You feel it in the wood beneath you, the way the dead feel north inside the ground. First wave hit without a word, no thunder and no warning horn. It rose like something standing up and leaned across the bow like scorn.
The sea does not explain itself. Command the wave and hear it laugh.
Waves answer to no one,
not to gods,
not to men. Barur svara engum,
eigi góðum,
eigi mönnum.
We called to Njörður and Rhine by name. We threw the silver overboard.
The water took it like a mouth and gave us nothing but the roar.
The gods are small beneath these waves. Command the wave and hear it laugh.
Waves answer to no one,
not to gods,
not to men. Barur svara engum,
eigi góðum,
eigi mönnum.
The captain threw his arm ring in the one his father wore to war.
The wave that followed was the worst, as though the sea had seen the gold
and understood its worth exactly, and decided that the price
for every
does not hate the wood. It does not choose which plank to break. The keel that held through 7 seas will snap the same as driftwood scraps. The sea weighs everything the same. There is no cruelty in depth. The sea has no mercy built, only depth and only weight. Sjórinn hefur enga miskunn, aðeins dýpt og aðeins þyngt. My brother swam the strongest stroke. The wave did not applaud or wait. It held him under just the same as the boy who never learned to swim. The sea does not reward the brave. There is no cruelty in depth. The sea has no mercy built, only depth and only weight. Sjórinn hefur enga miskunn, aðeins dýpt og aðeins þyngt.
He held the rope with both his hands, and the wave took both his hands with it. Not the rope, not the mast, not the man, just the grip that kept him to the world. The sea did not pull him under. The sea simply kept rising, and the distance between his mouth and air became a thing that breathing could not cross.
No mercy built, only depth and only weight. Sjórinn hefur enga miskunn, aðeins dýpt og aðeins þyngt. Last night, and the salt found every line. It does not wait for wounds to close. It enters while the blood still runs. The sea heals nothing that it breaks.
Salt preserves what should decay.
Salt finds every wound.
The sea knows where you bled.
Salt finner that's all.
Sjórinn veit hvar þú blöddir.
Across his shoulder blade was 3 days old and almost closed.
The wave that knocked him to the deck opened it like something old.
The sea remembers what you heal. Salt preserves what should decay. Salt finds every wound.
The sea knows where you bled.
Salt finner that's all.
Sjórinn veit hvar þú blöddir.
Cuts or the places where the rope had torn. The worst was the small wound on his wrist, where the oath ring used to sit. The captain's ring he threw for on. The salt found where the gold had been and burned the shape of what he gave into the skin that used to hold it. Every wound.
The sea knows where you bled.
Salt finner that's all.
Sjórinn veit hvar þú blöddir.
Sjórinn veit hvar þú blöddir. The hull. We call to Ægir in the deep. We carve the rune upon the mast. We bled into the water black. We gave the sea what it did not ask. The deep has no ears for men.
Pray to what cannot hear.
The deep has no ears for men.
Það eigi heyri.
Djúpið hefir engi eyru manna. played the melody, and the wave erased the final note. The song returned to us as foam. The deep has no ears for men.
Pray to what cannot hear.
The deep has no ears for men. Djúpið hefir engi eyru manna.
Kneeled beside the oar hole and pressed his face against the wood. He was not praying to the gods. He was talking to his daughter, telling her the name of every knot his father taught him on the shore, as though the rope between them both could hold across the distance of the storm.
The deep has no ears for men. Djúpið hefir engi eyru manna. The center line, not from weakness but from weight. The storm pressed everything at once, the wood, the rope, the iron, the men, and everything bent toward the sea. The storm does not explain. The storm owes nothing spoken. It takes and does not count.
Stormurinn skuldar ekki. Hann tekur og teller eigi.
I watched the sail tear east to west, a sound like skin across the bone. The rigging fell in tangled heaps like dead men's arms across the deck. The ship became a body breaking. The storm does not explain. The storm owes nothing spoken. It
vargrok teller eigi.
The wave that broke the starboard side was not the largest of the night. It was the one that came from underneath. While every man was looking up, the sea does not attack your strength. It finds the place your eyes are not and enters like a blade turned sideways through the gap you thought was sealed.
The storm owes nothing spoken. It takes and does not count.
Stormrin skuldar ekki. Han tekur og teller eigi.
The wave did not announce its name. It rose behind us like a wall. No crash, no warning, just the weight of everything the sea had held, released in one unbroken fall.
The sea takes without opening its mouth.
Swallowed in the sea, moved on, as though no ship had sailed.
Gleypt Sjórinn fór áfram, sem engi skipi hafði siglt. 3 men went over with the rail.
The water closed above their hands.
No scream survived the distance up.
The foam replaced them where they stood.
And by the time we turned to look,
The sea was flat where they had been. The sea takes without opening its mouth.
Swallowed and the sea moved on,
as though no ship had sailed. Gleypt Sjórinn fór áfram, sem engi skipi hafði siglt.
The youngest went over last. His hand was still around the oar,
Not gripping but resting on it.
the way a child holds a stick
He looked at me the way you look.
at someone through a closing door.
Not afraid, not angry.
Just watching the distance grow.
swallowed and the sea moved on,
As though no ship had
not weigh what you have done. It holds the coward and the brave in the same black arms beneath the wave. The deep does not separate the bone. No judgment in the crushing dark.
The deep does not judge the drowned. It holds all men the same.
Júpíter mér eigi drukknaða, það heldur alla menn jafna. The king who sailed with golden prow sings at the speed of any man. The oath, the gold, the blood, the name dissolve to salt and nothing stands.
The deep receives without a hand.
No judgment in the crushing dark.
The deep does not judge the drowned. It holds all men the same.
Júpíter mér eigi drukknaða, það heldur alla menn jafna. When the rope snapped clean and for 3 breaths I was below. The water was not cold down there, it was not dark the way I thought. It was quiet like the inside of a drum after the last strike has rung. And I understood that drowning is not the sea attacking you. It is the sea forgetting that you're there. Came in before the dawn and laid them on the sand like gifts. The wood, the rope, the broken oar, the cloak still knotted at the throat. The sea returns what it does not want. The tide gives back, but does not apologize. What the tide returns is broken, but the sea returns it whole.
Þar flóðið skilar brotið, en sjórinn skilar því heilu.
I found the arm ring in the sand, the one the captain threw for round. The gold had bent but held its shape. The wrist that wore it was not there. The sea kept what the gold could not. The tide gives back, but does not apologize. What the tide returns is broken, but the sea returns it whole.
Þar flóðið skilar brotið, en sjórinn skilar því heilu. The oar the youngest held was there, still warm from where his hand had gripped. I picked it up and felt the grooves his fingers carved into the wood. Not runes, not letters, nothing meant, just the shape of holding on. The tide had washed away the salt, but left the marks of what he held.
What the tide returns is broken, but the sea returns it whole.
Þar flóðið skilar brotið, en sjórinn skilar því heilu.
The shore has kept the mark of every keel that ever dragged across its face.
The grooves remain when ships are gone.
The sand remembers what the sea erased. Stone forgets slower than water. The shore remembers every hull.
The sea forgets before the wave.
Stranded man, verntur.
Sjórinn gleymir fyrr en bylgja.
The women on the cliff have stood Since the morning after the storm, they count the wreckage piece by piece and match each plank to someone's name. They know the wood before the word. Stone forgets slower than water. The shore remembers every howl.
The sea forgets before the wave.
Stranded man, venture.
Sjórinn gleymir fyrr en bylgja.
The helmsman's wife came to the shore before anyone had spoken. She brought his second pair of boots, the ones he kept beside the fire. She set them at the waterline and waited for the tide to choose, to take them or to leave them there. The tide left them, and she knew.
The shore remembers every home.
The sea forgets before the wave.
Stranded man, vargrøk.
Sjórinn gleymir fyrr en bylgja. The sea was still before we woke. The surface held no sign of what it did. No scar, no stain, no shadow kept. The blue returned as though the storm had been a thing we dreamed and held too long. The calm is not a gift. The sea was already still before we learned to grieve. Sjórinn þegar, kyrr, lærðum syrgja. I stood where the helmsman used to stand and felt the wood still warm beneath. The sky had pressed itself back flat. The line between the sea and air had drawn itself again like nothing broke. The calm is not a gift. The sea was already still before we learned to grieve. Sjórinn þegar, kyrr, lærðum syrgja.
I looked looked over the side at dawn and saw my face inside the water. The same face that had screamed all night was floating on a surface made of glass, and underneath my own reflection, in the dark below the calm, I thought I saw the youngest rower still holding his oar, still looking up, as though the closing door had never fully shut.
Sjórinn var þegar kyrr, áður lærðum að syrgja.